Come close now, dear heart, and tuck the covers tight around your chin while the world outside grows dim and still. Can you smell that? It's the scent of old wood, sun-drenched rosemary, and a secret that has been waiting in the shadows of an Italian valley for a long, long time. I have a story to tell you about a place called Valora, where the vines speak in whispers and the soil remembers every footstep. It's a tale of a lost soul, a fierce heart, and a legacy hidden in an empty glass bottle. So close your eyes, let your breathing slow, and let's wander together into the golden light of the vineyard, where the magic of the earth is just beginning to wake up. The tires of Julian's car crunched over the sun-baked gravel, sounding like heavy sighs echoing through the valley as he pulled up to the iron gates of Valora. The air that greeted him was thick and golden, smelling of wild rosemary crushed underfoot and the dusty, bittersweet scent of a house that has been holding its breath for far too long. It was that soft, bruised hour of dusk when the shadows stretch out like long fingers, and as Julian stepped onto the cracked stone porch, a single wooden shutter groaned against the peeling white paint, hanging by a rusted hinge like a broken wing. He stood there for a moment, his hand resting on the cold brass doorknob, feeling a strange shiver that wasn't from the wind. This place felt alive, as if the walls were leaning in to see if the boy who left 10 years ago had finally come back as a man. But the silence that met him was heavy and accusing. He thought of his grandfather's calloused hands and the way the old man used to hum to the vines, and a sharp knot of guilt tightened in his chest. Julian had traded this golden dirt for the gray concrete of the city, and now, standing in the fading light, he felt like a ghost trying to reclaim a life he had purposefully walked away from. The keys won't work if the house doesn't recognize you, Julian. A sharp voice called out from the darkness of the olive grove, making him jump. Out stepped Sophia, her boots caked in the rich, dark soil of the neighboring farm, and her dark hair tied back with a faded red ribbon. She didn't offer a hug or a smile. Instead, she leaned against a gnarled tree trunk with her arms crossed, her eyes reflecting the last embers of the sunset. Julian tried to find words, but his throat felt as dry as the abandoned well in the courtyard, and he realized just how much of a stranger he had truly become to the people who stayed behind. "I heard you were coming back to sign the papers and leave us for good," Sophia said, her voice dropping to a low, melodic thrum that carried the weight of the entire valley's disappointment. She walked closer until she was standing in the circle of light from his porch lamp, her presence as warm and fierce as a summer hearth. She told him that while he was busy in his tall glass buildings, the land had been mourning. The vines had withered, not from lack of water, but from lack of love. And the very soil seemed to have lost its heart the day his grandfather's chair went still. Julian looked at his own clean, soft hands and felt a wave of shame so deep it made his eyes sting. He wanted to tell her he was sorry, that the city had been a loud, lonely mistake, but Sophia simply turned her back on him, disappearing into the twilight with a warning that the vineyard had a way of keeping what belonged to it. He watched her go, the fireflies beginning to wink in the tall, unkempt grass like tiny lanterns searching for something lost, and the weight of the house behind him felt less like a burden and more like a silent, expectant heartbeat. He finally turned the key, the lock yielding with a slow, metallic click that echoed through the dark hallway. The interior was cool and smelled of old paper and cedar wood, a sanctuary of shadows that seemed to pulse with a gentle, hidden mystery as Julian stepped over the threshold. The wind outside died down to a whisper, leaving him alone with the memories tucked into every corner of the room. He climbed the stairs, the wood creaking softly under his weight, as if the house were settling down to sleep, and he closed his eyes, wondering if the morning light would reveal the secret his grandfather had tucked away in the silver dust of the cellar. The heavy wooden door to the cellar groaned with a deep, hollow protest, as if it hadn't tasted the light of a lamp in 100 years. Julian held a flickering candle high, the flame dancing nervously against the damp stone walls and casting long, spindly shadows that looked like reaching vines. The air down here was different than the house above. It was cool and tasted of wet earth, iron, and the sweet, lingering ghost of fermented grapes that had long since turned to dust. He descended the stone steps, each one worn smooth in the center by his grandfather's heavy work boots, and made his way to the very back of the vault where the private collection slept. His eyes fell upon a single bottle, nestled in a bed of gray cobwebs that shimmered like silk in the candlelight. The label was yellowed and curling at the edges, but the handwriting was unmistakable, bold and elegant, marking the year of Julian's birth. He reached out, his fingers trembling slightly as they brushed against the cold glass. But when he lifted it, the bottle felt strangely light. It was empty, a hollow vessel sitting in the place of honor, and for a moment, Julian felt a cold splash of disappointment, wondering if his grandfather had simply forgotten to fill it. Beneath the bottle lay a folded piece of parchment, the paper thick and rough against his palms. As he unfolded it, the scent of old tobacco and dried lavender drifted up, and he could almost hear Matteo's gravelly, warm voice whispering the words. The letter didn't talk about sugar content or fermentation. Instead, Matteo wrote that the perfect vintage was never something you could pour into a glass, but was the legacy of the sweat you left in the rows and the love you gave to a land that would outlive you. Julian sat on an old, upturned crate, the silence of the cellar pressing against his ears, and realized with a jolt that he couldn't just sign a paper and walk away. To sell this place now would be like tearing out the final chapter of a book he hadn't even finished reading. A soft scuff of a boot on the stairs made him look up, and there was Sophia, the moonlight from the open door above catching the silver thread of her shawl. She didn't look as angry as she had the night before, but her eyes were still watchful and sharp like a hawk's. She sat on the bottom step, her presence grounding the airy stillness of the room, and for the first time, they spoke without the armor of their pride. Julian confessed his confusion about the empty bottle, his voice echoing softly off the low ceiling, and Sophia told him that Matteo had spent his final days watching the road, hoping Julian would come back to help him plant the heart of the vineyard, a secret patch of land that held the key to everything. He wasn't waiting for a worker, Julian. He was waiting for a grandson, Sophia whispered, her voice softening as she watched the candle flame reflect in his wide eyes. They sat there for a long time, the tension between them melting into a quiet curiosity. A bridge built of shared memories and the damp, earthy smell of the cellar. Julian looked at the empty bottle again and saw it not as a disappointment, but as an invitation to fill his own life with something meaningful. He felt a strange, budding warmth in his chest, a feeling that perhaps he wasn't just a visitor here, but a part of the very foundation. As they finally climbed back up to the warmth of the kitchen, the cellar door clicked shut behind them, sealing away the ghosts and the shadows for the night. Outside, the moon hung low and heavy, like a ripe white peach, casting a milky glow over the sleeping vines that seemed to be waiting for the first touch of a hand that finally understood their worth. And Julian fell asleep to the sound of the wind humming a secret tune through the chimney, promising that the morning would bring the first real day of his new life. The sun climbed high over the valley, baking the scent of dry grass and wild thyme into the air until the heat felt like a warm, heavy blanket draped over Julian's shoulders. He stood before the collapsed section of the eastern perimeter wall, where the ancient limestone blocks lay scattered like a giant's broken teeth. The stones were rough and bit into his soft palms, leaving white, powdery streaks against his skin as he struggled to lift a particularly heavy boulder that refused budge. It felt as if the very land was testing him, stubborn and unyielding, mocking the city boy who thought he could mend a century of history with nothing but a pair of borrowed gloves and a desperate heart. Every time he managed to stack a few stones, the balance would shift with a disheartened thud, sending his progress tumbling back into the dirt in a cloud of fine, gray dust. Julian sat back on his heels, his breath coming in ragged gasps and his heart drumming a rhythm of pure, stinging failure against his ribs. He felt so small beneath the vast, blue Italian sky, wondering if he was truly a fool for staying. He thought of his office back in the city, where everything was settled with a click of a button, and nothing ever made his muscles ache or his spirit feel so raw. But just as he was about to throw down his trowel, a shadow fell across the sun-drenched earth. He looked up to see old Silvio, the village baker, hobbling toward him with a heavy canvas bag and a wooden mallet tucked under his arm. Without saying a single word, the old man knelt in the dirt, his knees creaking like the floorboards of the manor, and began to sift through the rubble with hands that looked like gnarled olive roots. Soon after, Maria appeared from the dusty path, carrying a basket lined with a checkered cloth that smelled of rosemary, focaccia, and sharp, aged pecorino cheese. One by one, the elders of Valora emerged from the shimmering heat of the morning, men with sun-darkened skin and women with wise, sparkling eyes, all bringing their own tools and a quiet, steady strength that Julian hadn't realized still existed in the world. They didn't lecture him or ask why he had been gone so long. Instead, they simply stepped into the gaps beside him, their movements rhythmic and sure as they passed stones from hand to hand in a silent, beautiful dance of cooperation. Julian felt a lump grow in his throat as he watched them work, realizing that these people weren't just fixing a wall, they were stitching him back into the fabric of the village. He reached out to take a stone from Maria, and as their fingers brushed, she gave his hand a gentle, firm squeeze that told him more than 1,000 books ever could. He wasn't an outsider anymore. He was a grandson of the soil, a member of a tribe that measured a man not by his bank account, but by the steadiness of his shoulder. When a neighbor's wall fell down, the air grew thick with the sound of metal, tapping stone, and the low, melodic hum of a folk song that Maria began to whistle, a tune that Julian realized he remembered from his earliest cradle days. By the time the shadows began to lengthen, the wall stood straight and proud once more, a sturdy spine of white rock that seemed to glow in the fading light. They shared the bread and cheese in a comfortable, tired silence. The taste of the salt and the warmth of the yeast filling Julian with a sense of belonging that made the city feel like a distant, fading dream. He looked at the line of smiling, weary faces and felt a surge of hope that was as bright as the first star blinking into existence over the ridge. As the villagers finally began to drift back toward their own hearths, the valley settled into a soft, velvety violet hue that seemed to hum with a secret satisfaction. Julian stayed behind for a moment, running his hand over the cool, newly placed stones and feeling the pulse of the earth vibrating beneath his touch. The wall was finished, but he knew the real work was only just beginning. And as he looked toward the darkened hills where the old spring was said to hide, he felt a gentle tug of mystery calling him to discover what lay beneath the thirsty roots of the sleeping vines. The dry, brittle leaves of the vines rattled like parched parchment as Sophia knelt in the dirt, her fingers digging deep into the cracked, silver-gray soil that felt more like ash than life. She looked up at Julian, her face illuminated by the pale, ghostly light of a rising moon, and held out a handful of the dust that sifted through her fingers like sand in an hourglass. There was a quiet, sharp urgency in the way the night air suddenly turned cold, carrying the scent of dry stone and the faint, teasing promise of rain that never seemed to arrive. The land isn't dying of old age, Julian. It's being starved, Sophia whispered, her voice cutting through the stillness with a jagged edge of grief. She explained how a developer from the city had quietly rerouted the mountain streams to feed a new luxury resort further down the valley, stealing the lifeblood of Valora while the village slept. Julian felt a cold spark of anger ignite in his chest, a protective instinct he hadn't known he possessed. Realizing that his grandfather's struggle hadn't been against time, but against greed, Sophia told him of the old spring, a legendary vein of water hidden high in the limestone ridges that his grandfather used to talk about in riddles. A source so deep and pure it was said to taste like melted stars. They moved to the porch, spreading out a tattered, hand-drawn map that had been passed down through Sophia's family, the edges frayed and soft as velvet under the vast diamond-strewn canopy of the Italian sky. They hunched over the paper, their shoulders brushing as they traced the faint lines of forgotten goat paths and hidden ravines. Julian found himself watching the way the lamplight caught the determination in Sophia's eyes, and he felt a strange, fluttering warmth that had nothing to do with the summer heat. He told her about his life in the city, the hollow noise, and the way he had forgotten the color of the real sky, while Sophia spoke of her dreams of seeing the vineyard bloom again, her voice softening as she shared how she used to hide in these very rows as a child. As the hours drifted by, the map became a bridge between them, turning to wary strangers into a team with a single, heartbeat-thumping mission. Julian realized that for the first time in years, he wasn't looking at a screen or a clock, but into the soul of someone who saw the world for its beauty rather than its price tag. The suspicion that had sat between them like a wall began to crumble, replaced by a tentative, glowing bond that felt as natural as the vines reaching for the sun. He reached out to point at a marking on the map, and his hand lingered near hers. the air between them electric and sweet with the smell of night-blooming jasmine. "We leave at dawn," Julian said, his voice firm with a newfound purpose that surprised even himself, knowing that the journey would be steep and the path, perhaps, dangerous. Sophia nodded, a small, genuine smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. That made Julian's heart skip a beat, like a pebble tossed into a still pond. He thought of the developer and the silver soil, and he knew he would climb every peak in Italy if it meant bringing the song of running water back to these thirsty roots. They sat in a comfortable, expectant silence, watching the constellations shift slowly across the heavens, feeling like the only two people left in a world full of secrets. The moon eventually dipped behind the jagged peaks, leaving the valley in a soft, indigo slumber that felt heavy with the weight of what was to come. Julian walked Sophia to the edge of the grove, the fireflies dancing around them like tiny, flickering wishes that refused to go out. He watched her silhouette fade into the shadows of the olive trees, and as he climbed into his own bed, his mind was alive with the image of a hidden spring, gushing through the dark earth, wondering if the mountain was ready to give up the treasures it had been guarding for so many generations. The morning mist clung to the jagged limestone cliffs like a tattered gray veil, dampening the sound of Julian's boots as they bit into the loose, sliding scree of the mountain path. Each step upward was a rhythmic struggle, the air growing thinner and cooler, smelling of sharp pine resin and the clean metallic tang of wet stone. Julian could feel the burning pull in his calves and the steady, heavy thumping of his heart against his ribs, a reminder that he was no longer cushioned by the soft chairs of his office, but was finally moving through a world that required every ounce of his strength. Sophia moved ahead of him with the grace of a mountain goat, her breathing steady and her eyes fixed on the ridgeline where the sky met the earth in a sharp blue line. They climbed higher until the vineyard below looked like a tiny green postage stamp, lost in a sea of brown, and Julian found himself wondering if he was chasing a ghost or a future. He thought about his life back home, the meetings and the noise, and how strangely hollow it all felt compared to the weight of a water canteen and the warmth of the sun on the back of his neck. He realized he wasn't just climbing a mountain, he was stripping away the layers of a man he no longer wanted to be, hoping to find someone worth keeping beneath the sweat and the dust. Near the summit, tucked into a natural alcove of rock, they came upon a small stone hut where a plume of wood smoke curled lazily into the air. An old man named Marco sat on a low bench, his face a map of deep wrinkles and his eyes the color of a cloudy winter sea. He was a shepherd who had watched these hills for 80 years, and he didn't move as they approached, his weathered hands busy carving a piece of olive wood. Julian stepped forward, his voice raspy from the climb, and asked about the location of the old spring. But Marco didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked Julian up and down with a piercing gaze that seemed to peel back his skin and read his very intentions. "Anyone can take from the earth, boy, but few know how to belong to it," Marco said, his voice sounding like two stones rubbing together. He stood up slowly, leaning on a gnarled staff, and asked the question that made the wind seem to stop in its tracks. "Does the land want you? Or do you just want the land?" Julian felt the words sink deep into his chest, cold and heavy. He realized that up until this moment, he had viewed the vineyard as a problem to be solved or a prize to be kept, but never as a living thing that had a choice in the matter. He looked at Sophia, then back at the old man, and for a long, quiet minute, the only sound was the distant bleat of a sheep and the rustle of the dry grass. "I want to be the man my grandfather hoped I'd be," Julian whispered, the honesty of the words catching in his throat like a prayer. Marco's stern face didn't break into a smile, but his eyes softened just a fraction, a sign that the mountain was satisfied with the answer. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, jagged piece of obsidian, a stone that didn't belong to these limestone hills, and handed it to Julian. He told them to look for the place where the shadows narrowed into a needle's eye and the ferns grew thick against the north face, for that was where the mountain hid its greatest treasure. They thanked the old shepherd and began the final trek toward the hidden crevice, the obsidian stone feeling warm and heavy in Julian's palm like a promise kept. The air grew damp and smelled of deep, dark secrets, and as they rounded the final bend, the temperature dropped and the silence became thick and expectant. Julian felt a tingle of excitement and a hint of something ancient and mysterious waiting just beyond the next outcrop, and as the first faint sound of a rhythmic, underground dripping reached his ears, he felt the mountain exhale a long-held breath, inviting them into the heart of the stone to see what lay hidden in the dark. The air inside the mountain's throat was chilled and tasted of wet flint and ancient, sleeping shadows, making the skin on Julian's arms prickle with a strange, nervous energy. As they squeezed through the narrow needle's eye Marco had described, the world of sun and wind vanished, replaced by the rhythmic, hollow drip-drop of water echoing somewhere deep within the stone. The walls were slick with moss that felt like cold velvet under Julian's palms, and the only light came from the dancing beam of Sophia's flashlight, cutting through the gloom to reveal a massive tumble of jagged rocks that choked the cavern floor like a barricade built by the mountain itself. Beyond that wall of stone, they could hear it, a muffled, frantic, gurgling like a trapped bird beating its wings against a cage. The water was there, desperate and straining to reach the valley, but a heavy shelf of granite had wedged itself deep into the crevice during a forgotten landslide, blocking the path. Julian looked at the narrow gap between the rocks and felt a sudden, sharp squeeze of fear in his chest, his mind flashing back to the safety of his wide city desk. But then he looked at Sophia. Her face was set in a mask of quiet bravery as she began to uncoil the thick hemp rope from her shoulder, her hands moving with a steady, rhythmic grace that calmed the frantic beating of his heart. "I have to go in there and lever that main stone loose, or the pressure will never break through," Julian whispered, his voice sounding small against the vast silence of the cave. Sophia looped the rope around a sturdy limestone pillar and then around Julian's waist, pulling the knot tight with a firm, lingering tug that felt like a promise. Their eyes met in the dim light, and in that silent moment, years of city noise and mountain pride simply melted away, leaving only a raw, beautiful trust. "I won't let go, Julian, not for a second," she promised, her voice a warm anchor in the cold dark. And Julian realized that he wasn't just risking his life for the water, but for the chance to be someone who finally finished what he started. He slid into the damp, tight crevice, the stone pressing against his back and chest until he could barely draw a full breath. the smell of crushed ferns and wet earth filling his senses. He reached for the iron crowbar, his muscles screaming as he wedged it into the crack beneath. The master stone pushing with every ounce of strength he had inherited from his grandfather's lineage. He felt the rope taut against his ribs, Sophia's strength pulsing through the line like a second heartbeat, and he gave one final, desperate heave. A low, grinding groan echoed through the chamber, a sound like the mountain itself was sighing. And suddenly, the world seemed to explode in a rush of cold, crystalline light. A spray of freezing water hit his face, tasting of minerals and victory. As the master stone gave way and a powerful torrent began to roar past his boots, Julian scrambled back into the main cavern, his clothes soaked and his spirit soaring, and Sophia caught him in a fierce, laughing embrace that smelled of rain and adrenaline. They stood together in the drenching spray, watching the water reclaim its ancient path, carving through the dust of the cave and singing a song of rebirth that made the very floor beneath them vibrate. It was a moment of pure, shimmering catharsis, as if all the years of neglect and silence were being washed away by the relentless, cold beauty of the spring. As the roar of the water settled into a steady, joyful rush, they sat on the damp cave floor, exhausted and shivering, but filled with a glowing warmth that no fire could ever match. They watched the stream disappear down the tunnel toward the vineyard far below, imagining the thirsty roots of the vines waking up to the first taste of life in a decade. The cavern seemed to soften around them, the shadows turning a gentle, misty blue as the first hint of the water's journey reached the light of day. And Julian closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the mountain's heartbeat finally finding its rhythm again, wondering if the valley was already feeling the change in the air. The first sound was a low, musical gurgle rising from the throat of the dry earth, followed by the sight of dark, damp ribbons unfurling through the dusty irrigation channels like spilled ink on a thirsty map. Within hours, the parched, silver silence of the vineyard was replaced by a symphony of liquid whispers, as the water from the high ridge finally found its way home to the roots that had been dreaming of this moment for a decade. The air itself seemed to change, losing its sharp, metallic edge of heat and softening into a mist that smelled of wet slate, wild mint, and the sweet, heavy perfume of jasmine waking up in the twilight. As the days passed, a miracle of green began to ripple through the valley, turning the skeletal vines into lush, emerald cathedrals that reached for the sun with renewed vigor. The village seemed to wake up alongside the land, the heavy weight of worry lifting from the elders' shoulders as they watched the leaves unfurl like tiny, hopeful hands to celebrate the return of the lifeblood of Valora. The villagers gathered in the central courtyard of the manor, hanging strings of amber lanterns that glowed like fallen stars against the deepening violet of the sky. Long wooden tables were groaned under the weight of crusty bread, sun-ripened tomatoes, and jugs of the previous year's wine, which tasted better now that the future was no longer a barren shadow. Julian stood on the edge of the festivities, his heart feeling oddly full and quiet as he watched the community he had once tried to flee. He looked down at his hands, which were now stained with dirt, and realized he had never felt more like himself than he did in this moment. He thought about the city, the cold glass buildings, and the way time used to slip through his fingers like water. But here, every second felt heavy and significant. He felt a sudden, sharp realization that the vineyard wasn't just a project or a piece of property. It was a living, breathing testament to the endurance of love, and he was merely its newest guardian. His eyes found Sophia across the courtyard. She was laughing with Silvio, her head tilted back and her hair catching the warm glow of the lanterns like spun mahogany. She wasn't the fierce, prickly girl he had met at the gate anymore. Or perhaps she always had been this radiant, and he just hadn't known how to see her. She was the very pulse of this valley, the heart that kept beating even when the water ran dry. And as she looked up and caught his gaze, the disdain of the past weeks was replaced by a soft, shimmering invitation that made Julian's breath catch in his throat. He walked toward her, his boots kicking up the fine, warm dust of the courtyard. And as the local accordion player struck up a slow, rhythmic tune, he reached out his hand. They danced together in the center of the circle, their movements slow and easy as the scent of blooming jasmine wrapped around them like a silken shawl. The music was a heartbeat, and for a few beautiful minutes, the world outside the valley ceased to exist. Julian leaned in, his voice a low murmur against the evening breeze, thanking her for not letting him walk away when the gates were first opened. Sophia didn't say anything at first. She simply leaned her head against his shoulder for a fleeting second. A gesture so tender and honest that it felt like the final seal on his decision to stay. They were no longer two people fighting over a ruin. They were two souls building a sanctuary. As the celebration continued into the late night, the lanterns flickered low and the music softened to a gentle hum that echoed through the hills. The heat of the day lingered in the stones of the courtyard, radiating upward and keeping the dancers warm long after the stars had taken their places in the velvet sky. Julian looked toward the dark silhouette of the manor, feeling a strange sense of peace settle over him like a soft blanket. Yet, as the last notes of the accordion faded, he noticed a strange, unfamiliar, flickering light moving far off in the darkened groves near the property line, leaving him to wonder if the developers had truly given up their claim on this newly awakened paradise. The morning air was shattered, a sound so out of place in the quiet valley that it seemed to make the very birds stop their singing. A sleek, black sedan sat idling at the edge of the courtyard, its polished surface reflecting the sunlight with a cold, blinding glare that felt like an intrusion upon the soft, green peace of the vines. The scent of expensive leather and air conditioning drifted out, clashing with the earthy aroma of damp soil and the sweet, lingering perfume of the morning roses. And a man in a stiff, charcoal suit stepped out, clutching a leather briefcase, as if it were a shield against the beauty of the world around him. The developer, a man named Marcus, whose eyes were as restless as the city streets, walked toward the porch where Julian stood with his morning coffee. The village, usually a hum of morning activity, fell into a sudden, heavy silence that felt as thick as a winter fog. Silvio stopped sweeping his doorstep, and Maria leaned out, her window, her hands still dusted with flour, all eyes fixed on the man who carried the power to turn their history into a memory. Marcus didn't look at the mountains or the newly rushing water. Instead, he clicked open his briefcase and pulled out a stack of crisp, white papers that felt dangerously light for something that carried the weight of so many lives. "It's all here, Julian," The final offer that will set you up for a lifetime of comfort, Marcus said, his voice smooth and transactional, sliding the contract across the old wooden table. Julian looked at the document, the ink dark and final, and for a fleeting second, his mind drifted back to the city. He thought of the high-rise apartments, the restaurants where no one knew his name, and the easy, quiet wealth that would mean he never had to blister his hands again. He felt the ghost of his grandfather standing behind him, and he wondered if Matteo would be disappointed or if he would understand the lure of an easier path. But then Julian's gaze shifted to the vineyard, where the emerald leaves were dancing in the breeze, vibrant and alive because of his own sweat. He looked at Sophia, who was standing by the stone wall they had mended, her face pale, but her chin held high with a dignity that made the developer's suit look cheap. In her eyes, Julian saw the reflection of the man he had become over these past few weeks, a man who belonged to the morning mist and the heavy, honest tiredness of a day's work. He realized that the money Marcus was offering was just paper, but the soil beneath his boots was gold. The kind of gold you could taste in a grape and feel in the warmth of a neighbor's smile. He reached out, his fingers brushing the cool, stiff paper of the contract, and felt a sudden, clear surge of electricity through his veins. Without a word, Julian took the stack of papers in his hands. His heart was drumming a steady, joyful rhythm as he looked Marcus in the eye. And with a slow, deliberate motion, he tore the contract down the middle, the sound of the paper ripping, echoing through the courtyard like a celebratory crack of thunder. He did it again and again, until the life of ease was nothing but a handful of white confetti fluttering to the ground and settling in the dust. A collective exhale swept through the village, a sound of relief so deep it felt like the trees themselves were sighing in gratitude. And Sophia took a step toward him, her eyes shining with a pride that was the only reward he would ever need. Marcus, left in a cloud of exhaust and frustrated silence, his car disappearing down the winding road like a bad dream fading at dawn. The village didn't break into a loud cheer. Instead, they simply went back to their work, but with a new lightness in their steps that made the air feel like it was glowing. Julian sat on the porch steps, feeling the sun warm his face as he watched a single white scrap of paper get carried away by a playful breeze. He knew he had chosen the harder life, but as he watched the vines sway in the distance, he felt a deep, unshakable peace, wondering what the first true harvest would feel like. Now that the land was finally, truly his, the rhythmic snip-snip of the pruning shears echoed through the valley, accompanied by the heavy, intoxicating scent of sugar and sun-warmed skin as the first day of the vendemmia finally arrived. The grapes hung in heavy, purple clusters, dusted, with a fine silver bloom that shimmered like frost in the golden autumn light, waiting for the touch of a hand that had spent all summer learning their secrets. It was a morning of deep, vibrant color, where the sky was a sharp, piercing blue and the earth felt warm and solid beneath the boots of the entire village, who had come out to help bring in the bounty of the land they had saved together. Julian moved through the rows with a focused, meditative energy. His fingers stained a deep, bruised violet from the juice of the fruit he was gathering. Beside him, Sophia worked with a tireless, laughing strength, her presence a steady hum of comfort that made the grueling labor feel like a long-awaited dance. As the sun climbed higher, the heat became a physical weight, smelling of fermentation and dry earth. But the weariness in Julian's muscles was a sweet, honest kind of tired that he wouldn't have traded for all the air-conditioned offices in the world. He thought back to the man who had arrived in that sleek black car months ago, and he could barely recognize that ghost of himself, realizing that he had finally found a rhythm that matched the heartbeat of the seasons. The work was relentless, with crates piled high and the constant merry chatter of the elders. As they shared stories of harvests past, Julian's back ached and his sweat was salty on his lips. But every time he looked over at Sophia and saw the smudge of dirt on her cheek and the bright spark in her eyes, he felt a surge of vitality that made him feel invincible. They were no longer just two people working side by side. They were a team, a single engine driven by the same love for this patch of earth. He realized that the perfect vintage his grandfather had written about wasn't something you waited for, but something you built with your own two hands, snip by snip, row by row, until your soul was as stained by the work as your clothes were. As the final golden hour of the harvest approached, they retreated for a moment into the cool, quiet sanctuary of the wine cellar to fetch a fresh set of crates. In the dim light of the lantern, Julian's eyes fell once more upon the empty bottle. From his birth year, the one that had caused him such confusion when he first arrived, Sophia reached out and took his hand, her touch warm and stained with the essence of the grapes. And they both looked at the empty glass vessel with a new, profound understanding. Julian realized then that Matteo hadn't left it empty out of forgetfulness or neglect. He had left it as a blank page, a space waiting for Julian to pour in the results of his own labor and the story of his own return. He knew you had to fill it yourself. Julian, Sophia whispered, her voice a soft, melodic thread in the stillness of the stone room. Julian felt a lump of gratitude and love tighten in his throat, realizing his grandfather had given him the greatest gift of all, the freedom to define his own legacy. He took the bottle down from the shelf, holding it like a sacred relic, and imagined the dark, rich wine that would soon rest within it, a wine that would taste of mountain springs, village bread, and the fierce, beautiful trust of the woman standing beside him. The weight of the empty bottle no longer felt like a question, but like a promise, and he felt a deep, unshakable sense of peace settle over him. They carried the bottle back out into the fading sunlight, where the village was gathering for the final press of the season, the air thick with the celebratory sounds of laughter and the splashing of juice into the vats. The valley was turning, a soft, dusty rose as the shadows of the vines stretched out to meet the coming night. And as Julian watched the first of the new harvest being crushed, he felt a gentle shiver of anticipation for the quiet winter months ahead. He looked at the moon rising over the high ridge and wondered what other secrets the land was preparing to share now that the first great task was complete, shipping him softly toward a dream of deep, purple-stained sleep. The rocking chair gave a slow, rhythmic creak against the smooth porch boards, sounding like a steady heartbeat in the deepening indigo of the late autumn evening. A crisp, cooling breeze swept down from the high ridges, carrying the scent of wood smoke, dry pine needles, and the clean, metallic promise of the first frost. Julian sat wrapped in a heavy wool blanket that smelled faintly of cedar and home, watching the last sliver of the sun dip behind the mountains and leave the valley in a soft, velvety blanket of shadows, the vineyard below had finally fallen into its winter slumber. The vines stripped of their heavy purple fruit and standing like silent, silver guardians in the mist. Julian took a slow sip of the tea Sophia had brewed, the warmth of the ceramic mug seeping into his calloused palms and chasing away the lingering chill of the day's work. He looked at the farmhouse behind him. No longer a sagging ruin, but a glowing sanctuary with lamplight spilling from the windows and the shutters held firm and true against the wind. He thought of the man who had arrived here with a suitcase full of city suits and a heart full of hollow ambitions, and he smiled to see that man had vanished as completely as the morning fog. "The earth is dreaming now, Julian, and so should we," Sophia whispered, her voice a gentle, melodic murmur as she leaned her head against the back of her chair. Her hand found his in the space between them, her skin warm and familiar. And Julian felt a profound sense of completeness wash over him like a rising tide. He realized that his grandfather hadn't just left him a farm or a business. He had left him a way to belong to the world, to be a part of a cycle that was older than memory and stronger than greed. He wasn't the man who had come to sell his past. He was the man who had spent his sweat and his soul to plant a future that would bloom long after he was gone. They sat in a comfortable, sacred silence, listening to the distant, lonely cry of an owl and the soft rustle of the dormant vines as they settled into the cold earth. Julian closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his own body and the honest, heavy tiredness that comes from a life well lived and a day well spent. He thought of the empty bottle in the cellar, now filled with the rich, dark promise of the new harvest. And he knew that the lore of Valora was no longer a story about ghosts, but a living, breathing song of restoration. Every breath he took felt deeper and cleaner, as if the mountain air were washing away the last traces of his old, restless life. The stars began to blink into existence, one by one, tiny points of light that seemed to watch over the sleeping valley with a protective, ancient care. The fire in the hearth inside the house gave a final, cozy pop, sending a spray of orange sparks up the chimney to join the night sky. Julian felt the world slowing down, the edges of his thoughts softening into a hazy, golden blur. Of peace, he was home, and the land knew his name, and there was nothing left to do but trust in the quiet magic of the winter and the strength of the roots he had tended with such care. As the moon climbed to its highest point, casting a silver glow over the silent, resting world, the narrator's voice drops to a soft, rhythmic whisper, inviting you to let go of the day and sink into the warmth of your own sanctuary. The story of the weaver and the vineyard is tucked away now, safe and sound, like the vines beneath the frost, waiting for the spring but content in the deep, dark quiet of the present. You are safe, you are home, and as you drift into a sleep as deep and restorative as the valley itself, you might just wonder what beautiful, green dreams are already starting to stir beneath the cold, silver soil.